Good morning. I want to thank everybody for logging in and calling in to our webinar today, where we have a special guest on hand who's going to talk about appraisal review, and when you're investing with your self-directed IRA, how to best evaluate the investments you're looking at making and what goes into that process, and sharing a lot of great information with us today. So I really appreciate everybody who's logged in and live and is listening, and certainly anyone who's listening to the recorded version as well. Should be in for some really great information today. Before we get started, just wanted to remind everyone who's listening some of our other upcoming events. We have another webinar coming up this Friday, October 21st, on being the bank with a self-directed IRA. We're going to talk about how to be a private lender with your IRA, using your IRA to lend money to other parties, and obviously basically being a private lender, being a great source for other people. So make sure you tune in for that webinar. Be this Friday at noon. Next Tuesday, October 25th, in both our Atlanta and Tampa office, we'll be hosting some networking events. We call it titled Brewing Success. You can go to our website for more details on the locations and the times, but we'd love to have anyone and everyone come out to those events if possible. We also then have live Lunch and Learn coming up next Friday the 28th as well. Check our website for the topics that will be covered in the cities there. So make sure get to one of those events. I mean, today it's going to be some great information, great education, like we always do at Advanta. We really think that's the benefit of what people get out of using us and being involved with Advanta, is the education, the knowledge that we give them from different areas related to a self-directed IRA account. I mean, people are choosing the self-direct because they're looking for alternatives to the mutual funds, stocks, bonds, etc., and we exist to fill that void and show them what is possible. We like to do that through many of our different educational classes and webinars. My name is Scott Maurer. I'm the Director of Business Development for Advanta IRA. I'm also a licensed attorney, and I've been with the company now for over 10 years. Started out with Advanta doing a lot of the transactional work, people who are buying and selling real estate and notes and private LLCs and other things that we talk about from time to time. I help process those investments on behalf of the client, being the liaison for the client between their investment and them as the IRA owner. I've spent more of my time the last few years overseeing the business development, teaching classes, hosting the webinars that we're on today. So kind of not really doing the transaction side so much, but really focusing on helping build our company and making people more aware about self-directed IRAs. Before we get into kind of some of the presentation, I'll introduce our guest here in just a few minutes. Just a quick disclaimer, Advanta IRA does not endorse any particular products. We don't provide investment advice, and we also don't provide legal and tax advice. So we provide the webinars and the seminars as education. Before you go into making an investment, you want to make sure you do your due diligence on the people that you're working with, the property that you're buying, the individuals involved on the other side of the transaction, if there's any legal or tax consequences, getting the right advice from individuals in those fields. And we can certainly point you to some attorneys, financial advisors, tax advisors to help you make those decisions if need be. And just a quick background on our company. Our company's been around since 2004, and the only thing we do at Advanta is administer self-directed retirement accounts. We do not handle any non-qualified money, so it's only got to be IRAs, Roth IRAs, old 401k funds essentially. We handle those monies and do the administration record keeping with the alternative assets. So people wanting to invest into some of the assets we'll talk about probably today with our guest, we hold those assets, and a lot of brokerage firms and banks simply don't hold that. The big advantage, I think our big selling point, so to speak, is the customer service. We have a dedication to providing each customer with a kind of a local feel. So whoever they're working with in regards to their transactions or with their account, you're going to have one point of contact and feel like you get to know that person, work with that person, and develop a much better trust level with our company, and that's what we really focus on at Advanta with our dedication and focus on customer service. Now, as we go through the webinar today, if you're listening live, you have a chat box on your screen. You can type any questions that you have for myself or for our guest into that chat box. We'll make sure to get that question answered. If you're listening to the recorded version of this webinar, my contact information, also our guest contact information, is towards the end of the webinar. Jot down your questions and then reach out to either myself or our guest today to get those questions answered. So just make sure you type those questions into the chat box as we go along. Just very quickly, if anyone on the call is not familiar with self-directed IRAs, the reason why I think most individuals people who are not familiar with self-directed is because most individuals have their retirement accounts with a bank or with a brokerage firm that offers them limited investments. It doesn't make sense if you have a Charles Schwab account for them to offer you the ability to invest in real estate or to invest in private lending through your IRA account, because it's not something that they hold. They offer you the mutual funds, the stocks, bonds, those types of investments. Now, they're happy to hold those for you, but they're not going to offer you anything additional that they don't hold. So you're not being told that the investments that what else is out there. You basically have what you're limited to. So it'd be similar to going into a fast food restaurant and them advertising you or asking you if you wanted something that wasn't on their menu. So that's why you don't hear investment advisors, Charles Schwab or Fidelity or any of the brokerage firms talk about real estate in an IRA account. But certainly IRS regulations allow for a very broad range of investments. So you can make sure to again, 10 more of our webinars today is we have a guest on who's going to talk kind of about a very specific topic. But please attend some of our other events as well to learn more about self-direction if you have questions on that. Just very quickly, cover the accounts that can be self-directed. Again, if this is somewhat new to you and you're wondering what funds do I have available that could work or could be self-directed, any type of IRA, whether it's a traditional or a Roth, whether you have a SEP or a simple IRA, those can all be self-directed. Any former employer's plan, if you have an old 401k or an old 403b from working for the school board, those monies can also be rolled over into a self-directed account. And once you have the monies in those accounts, the investments are quite endless. There's quite a number of different things you can invest in within a self-directed IRA account. Again, most people are familiar with the mutual funds, stocks, bonds, etc. But you can also invest in various types of real estate, whether you're buying rental properties, you're into rehabs, you want to buy commercial property. Those assets can all be held within an IRA. A lot of individuals, instead of having their IRA buy the property, decide to do note and do private lending investments where your IRA can hold a note or hold a mortgage on a particular piece of real estate. Some of these things we're definitely going to get into with our guest here in just a moment, talk about the proper way to evaluate those types of investments. Lastly, there's a lot of other different categories, other investments kind of not related to real estate that we wouldn't really touch on today. But you can certainly call our office and give us a ring. If you have an investment idea in mind, give us a call. We'll be happy to walk through it with you and see if that's something that can indeed be held within a self-directed IRA account. So it's important, and again, I mentioned on a disclaimer a few slides ago that we don't do any due diligence for our clients and for the investments that they're making. It's up to the client if you're going to buy a rental property or you're going to make a loan to another individual to make sure that you evaluate the investment yourself. If you're buying a piece of real estate or you're making a loan, how do you research that investment? Looking to see what the property value is. Who is the borrower on the transaction? What kind of potentials do you have? If you're buying a rental property, you probably want to know what rent comps are in a particular area as well to get an idea, how is my investment going to perform and is this a great idea? Again, at Advanta, our job is to make sure that the investment gets properly titled, gets properly handled, and again, you can attend another webinar to get a little more details on that. But what we don't do is evaluate the investment for you. So it's important to have professionals, other individuals that can help you look into these particular questions. So that's why we are excited today to have invited Kevin Poinbuff to talk to us about these different types of strategies and what you need to do when you're properly appraising those assets that you're looking at buying. Kevin joins us today. Kevin is the Managing Director of StreetLender.com, which is a nationwide direct private money lender, mortgage management, and consulting firm. He has spent his 24-year career in mortgage banking, focused on commercial and residential lending, and has closed hundreds of real estate transactions. Kevin is an investor himself and has held equity and management positions in multifamily projects, mobile home parks, long-term rentals, and single-family rehab flip transaction. He is a subject matter expert in areas of private lending, underwriting, litigated foreclosure, and risk management. So we're very happy to have Kevin on board today. Kevin, are you there?
Yes, Scott, I'm here.
Great. Well, Kevin, what I'm going to do is I'll turn it over to you. I would again encourage anyone who's listening to the webinar now, If you have questions as we go along, just type them into the chat box. I have some questions of my own to ask Kevin as we go, but obviously we want to get, if you're listening to the webinar, get your questions answered. So at this point, Kevin, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, Scott, thank you for that introduction, and all of you again for joining us today, and special thanks to Advanta IRA for inviting StreetLender and myself to present today on the webinar to talk about private money lending within your self-directed IRA. And as Scott had mentioned, there's a great amount of resources. I would encourage you to check those things out that he had mentioned earlier. And I really feel privileged to be a part of that. And thank you again to Advanta. So Scott mentioned StreetLenders provides turnkey solutions for self-directed IRA holders like yourselves looking to do private money lending. So we also provide, as one of our services, a second pair of eyes to assist in the underwriting review process. So if you do have those questions, I'd be happy to answer those by phone or email. So like Scott said, our contact information will be at the end of this webinar today. Today we're talking about appraisal review and how to evaluate properties that will be backing your self-directed private money loan. So in order to protect you and protect your self-directed IRA when making these types of loans. So in the next 30 minutes, my goal is to unload the very best content and information that will save you a lot of headaches and, most importantly, protect your investment capital and retirement. So here's what we're covering today: best practices, caution items, red flags, things to look for, appraisal elements. Those are the things that you should find within the appraisal itself and expect to see. And then we'll actually walk through an appraisal, and we'll do an appraisal review. And I picked out some sections within an appraisal that, because of time constraints, we can't go through all of it, but I picked out some sections that might be of a real value for you. And at the very end, I'll give you an opportunity. I'll show you a way to actually get a copy and download a copy of our appraisal checklist, the exact one we use here at StreetLender when we underwrite our loans doing private money lending. So there's many important aspects to making a private loan, like finding the right borrower, negotiating the right terms, and getting the right paperwork done, as Scott had mentioned earlier, the title search done correctly. But really, the most important item securing your private money loan, it's the real estate. So without the right underlying asset, everything else is practically irrelevant. And there's good reason why banks require appraisals on every one of their real estate loans. And this is why you should too. So this is all about mitigating your potential risk. And the appraisal, as you see on the timeline here, should be done on the front end of the process. After you qualify and speak to a real estate investor who is seeking capital for funding, right on the very front end, the appraisal process should be started. And as you see, there's a handful of steps in the process of doing a private money loan, and they should be done on the very front end. So one of the best practices is always review your subject property with the exit strategy in mind. And what I mean by that is, how is the borrower or the real estate investor going to pay your private money loan off? What's the exit strategy? Are they going to do this as a retail resale, buy the property, fix it up, and flip it as a retail sale? Or are they going to buy it, rehab it, and then possibly refinance it to keep it as a long-term rental? And as you can imagine, a property that is rehabbed for a retail sale is much different than a rental property. And that's an important factor once you're trying to do an appraisal on a property. So all the finishing pieces of that appraisal or of that property should be included in the appraisal. So let's kind of walk through some of these items here. So when you order an appraisal, it's called a Uniform Residential Appraisal Report, the URAR. This is the most common form of appraisal. This is typically done by the appraiser who puts it on either a Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac form. That's not really that critical, but at the bottom you'll see that those forms are listed on the appraisal itself, and just to confirm. But for the most part, that's where it's going to go, on a URAR form. Now, the appraisal should be paid by the borrower. The person looking to seek capital, that should be paid by the borrower, and it should be ordered by you, okay, the lender. And that cost is typically between $350 and $500, depending on your market. That's generally what it would cost. And the turn time is usually between 3 and 7 business days. Another best practice is to find a good appraiser. You're the lender, so you should be calling the shots here, okay? It's up to you to find the right appraiser that's going to protect your interest. And when I say good, I mean this appraiser should be licensed. They should be state certified, state licensed, and they also should be local. You don't want an appraiser that's coming in from 30 miles out of town who doesn't know the market. It's critical. A good way to find an appraiser is to call a handful of your local mortgage lenders, call some brokers, and ask to speak to the processor. And what you'll find after a handful of phone calls is that the same appraisers will start to be mentioned. So that's a really good indication that, that these folks have good relationships and are providing good value and good service to these lenders, and should for you. So the appraisal should also include a subject to repairs. Subject to is also known in the real estate investment world as ARV, which is after repair value, which means the property is being appraised with an as-is perspective. However, the appraiser is going to use the real estate investor's rehab estimates and figures and scope of project to calculate into and estimate what the value will be subject to the repairs. So that's a must, and you'll see that as we move along here. Trust but validate. Okay, these are licensed appraisers, so they're putting their license on the line if they're not providing accurate information. But you also want to validate, okay, just to protect yourself. Go to Zillow.com, go to Realtor.com. You can see and get an idea on what properties are listed for sale in the current marketplace, and it'll bump up against that appraisal and give you some good indication. These last few items here are really about property types, condominiums, HOAs. Condominiums have HOAs just like planned unit developments, PUDs. The important factor about condominiums is the fact that, again, looking at the exit strategy in mind, a condominium is either warrantable or it's not. Either Fannie Mae has approved that project or they haven't. And if they haven't, then you got to make sure that you're prepared to hold that loan for a long time because they can't get retail financing. So it's very critical. I'm not going to really go into detail on that, but do Google search on your condo questionnaire, and it'll pop right up. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Other property types like manufactured homes, non-traditional, A-frames, geodomes, unusual layouts. These are the things you got to be really careful about because remember, the way you're going to exit is going typically through a retail buyer, and if they can't get financing, then you're holding that loan for quite a while. Also, duplex, triplex, quads. These are properties that are out of the mainstream. Most retail families are not going in to purchase a duplex to live there. So that would be a exit strategy of refinance. So you got to make sure that your real estate investor is capable of taking your loan out with a refinance. Okay? But in all of these, stick to your lender guidelines. Okay, that's kind of the theme of today, is stick to your lender guidelines that you make up. You're the lender, and if you don't have guidelines that you're going to go by, you better make them right now before you make a private money loan because you're going to get distracted. Okay, we'll talk about that in just a little bit. So let's move on here. So,
Kevin, if I can interrupt, I did have a quick question just talking about this. You were talking about appraisals, and we were talking about obviously from the lender standpoint of if your IRA is lending to someone else. Would you evaluate an appraisal report differently if you're the lender versus this property is one you're actually looking at purchasing within the IRA? So you're actually going to buying the property as opposed to simply being the lender. Do you approach that appraisal report any differently?
Yeah, you do. As a lender, we are here to mitigate our risk. All right. So what we do is we're trying to get a very conservative value to protect us. So in other words, for a divorce example, let's say the husband wants the highest value and the wife wants the lowest value for whatever reason, and they could indicate that to the appraiser, and the appraiser does have some leeway within the comparables because it's really subjective to their opinion. So as a lender, we are going to look at that much differently than a retail buyer, than a refinance situation, than any other situation. We're there to try to make sure that we've got a very conservative valuation. Okay, so it's a great question. So really the best and only time to worry about a loan is before making it. And need I say more? Actually, but yes, I can't help it. This is your time for your due diligence. Don't be rushed. Do not be influenced by anybody, the realtor, the borrower, the real estate investor, the seller, the wholesaler. Trust me, all these people will at some point assert their pressure to close the deal quickly. So ask me how I know this, but this happens. So our goal here at Street Lenders is to underwrite our private money loans with a central focus, and that's to preserve capital and protect, first and foremost, the return of capital. But then our paperwork and lending documents take care of the rest through a return on capital. So the focus is here trying to protect your asset. So a couple things to look for, some red flags, some caution items. Properties in a declining market, that should be red flag. Inappropriate comparables, maybe they're too far from the subject property. Oversupply, maybe the demand's low and there's too much property on the marketplace. Market time, properties that are listed for longer than 6 months could indicate some issues. The information within the appraisal should be consistent. So throughout the appraisal, it should match up with the contract and the physical location, etc. Property should also conform to zoning requirements. Other adverse site conditions or incurable structural factors. These are all things that are immediate red flags that you should keep an eye out for within the appraisal. So moving on here, appraisal elements. Here's the things that, these are the items that you should expect to see within the appraisal. And that would first and foremost include the 6-page report. That's all the analytical information, all the data, all the details are within that 6-page report. And then outside of that are going to be the market condition addendum. There'll be interior and exterior photos. The repair value, the ARV, will also be included. There will also be a building sketch. The appraiser will lay out a real rudimentary sketch of what that looks like in terms of a footprint. We'll also give you a subject property location map, but that's, of course, easily found in Google Maps. In fact, another side bit here is that when you've got the property, one thing we typically do is go into Google Maps or Earth and look at a satellite view, okay? You're going to be looking for things that aren't necessarily listed on the appraisal, like the water treatment plant that's a half a mile down the road. Well, that may not be mentioned in the appraisal. Or the recycling and trash pound that's down the street. These are factors that go into the retail decision buying minds of the people out there buying the property. Also, it will include at least 3 sales comparisons, which are comparables, also known as comps. Preferably, you want to see up to 6, if not more. And if that's the case, if there's more than 3, then the appraiser will mention or add a supplemental sales addendum. And of course, there'll be photos on those comps as well. Let's see, going through my notes here, making sure I didn't miss anything. One thing to remember, appraisals are micro, okay? We can all hear about things and comments like there's a strong market, it's a buyer's market, home sales are up, etc. While this is really important, you should be mostly concerned about the subject property's neighborhood, okay? And so we're really focused in on the neighborhood and the local market in which that subject property is located. We only care about things happening in the neighborhood or within a half a mile to a mile away, period. So keep that in mind.
Kevin, actually, I had another question for you. We were talking about, if you don't mind me jumping in. With appraisals, how long, I mean, if you go out and get an appraisal on a property, how long should that appraisal be good for? What's the shelf life, especially when you're looking at comps in the area? What's kind of a general rule of thumb for anyone who's listening for how long an appraisal would be good for?
That's a great question. And my first answer is you're the lender, so you make the rules. But if you were to ask me a general question about that, typically Fannie Freddie guidelines are 6 months, okay? So if it's less than 6 months, I would be okay with it. In hot markets, up or down, things happen very quickly. So a 6-month appraisal could be much different in month 1. So I would just be careful. I would definitely not go out further than 6 months, but it should be a lot sooner than that. So Great question.
And good, and it's going to remind anyone who's listening live, if you have your own questions that you want to ask, get them typed into the chat box. We'll make sure we get those addressed to Kevin as well. But Kevin, continue on.
Sure. Excellent. So here is a snapshot of the appraisal report itself. This is the beginning of that 6-page report I was discussing. This is where all the details, all the analytics is held to assist the appraiser in coming up with the final valuation. Now, if you've never looked at an appraisal before, it could be daunting by first glance. This is like the first quarter of the first page. So it will give you more than enough information about that property and more information than you probably need. However, all this is important to know. And each section is highlighted on the far left of the appraisal there. You'll see the subject. That's the subject portion, and below it is the contract section. So, and that's how it's structured out, so it's really organized. So in the first area, the subject section, and I'm going to be going through our own checklist I had mentioned earlier to kind of highlight some things that are really critical for you to review. So in the subject section, does the property address listed on the appraisal match the contract address? All right. This is a very simple QA. All right. So throughout this process, you want to make sure that things are accurate. And if it's not, you contact the appraiser and let them know things to be corrected. Does the appraiser of the borrower on the appraisal match the contract, okay, or your application for that matter? This is another QA thing that should be consistent. And another thing to think about is that the way we underwrite a street lender is we're only making loans to corporations, okay? We're not lending to personal. These should not be in personal names. And now this is another webinar for your protection, but that's another QA. Make sure that the borrower is listed as the person on the contract or company on the contract, and that should also be in an LLC, S Corp, C Corp, etc. Is the owner of public record the same as the owner on the contract and the title? If not, then maybe there's a middleman in there. Maybe there's a wholesaler. Maybe there's somebody who's put in a contract, then sold it to your real estate investor who's now getting funding and financing. Not that that's a big deal, but you want to know all the details on the project and how it's getting funded, who's involved, where the money's going. So that's really critical. Is the property a PUD or a condominium? Again, we talked about condos earlier. We won't go into that, but HOA fees are going to be a real factor in not only condominiums, but planned unit developments like townhomes. Even larger, newer developments have HOAs, and that's a planned unit development. This is a factor you've got to consider when making that loan. Because remember, the worst case scenario is how you need to look at this is, okay, one day I might have to own this property myself, and how can I get rid of it? So the contract. Did the appraiser analyze the sales contract and purchase contract? Well, if not, then we need to find out why and confirm there's no changes in the contract. Also in the contract section, are there seller contributions, credits from the seller, okay, going to your borrower? If there are, those really should be factored into and credited into the rehab funds account, okay? Because as a lender, I don't necessarily want cash going directly to my borrower at closing, okay? Those monies should go into and fund any reconstruction or rehab funds before any cash is going to my borrower, okay? I think you can understand why. So let's move on. The next section is describing neighborhoods, so the neighborhood itself. So are we seeing that the values are stable? Are they increasing? So if no, then this market is declining, and you need to make sure that the carrying costs that the borrower has projected is enough to carry you through a declining market. So you need to make sure they have interest expense to cover that loan for 3, 6, 9, 12, 18 months plus, okay? Is the demand or supply a shortage or is it an imbalance? Again, if it's not, there could be an oversupply. And this could push downward pressure on valuations and property values, okay? Is a market time less than 6 months? Again, we talked about this earlier, that the age of an appraisal is important. So if it's more than 6 months, get appraisal redone. If you're seeing longer marketing time for properties, this could also show a softening market and potential declining values. And again, goes back to the thing of making sure that your borrower has enough carrying costs and interest expense costs to cover through the rehab phase and remarketing phase to get your loan paid off. And in every section at the bottom, there should be a section where there are comments from the appraiser. So make sure you read those thoroughly, because this is where the appraiser is going to mention things that could be of detriment to the description of the property and what's happening with the subject. So let's move on here.
Kevin, I got a quick question on that. When kind of in looking at some of those terms, declining market, stable market, et cetera, how much is an appraiser in their profession allowed to get involved with making predictions, or kind of like they gave you this appraisal report, how much can they get into their report and kind of tell you what they think is going on, or do they have certain limitations on simply saying, here's what I found, you have to read it on your own, I'm not going to interpret it much more?
Well, the appraiser is going off of, they're trained. They're all trained and licensed and certified. So there are certain requirements that they have to follow to maintain licensing, okay? And part of their job is to decipher the facts of what's happening in the market and then give you an opinion. And that's really what it is. It's an opinion. So ultimately, it's up to you as a lender to take that opinion and verify and make sure that it fits in with your lending guidelines. But that's a great question, and I hope that answers it. So let's move on here. The site section, a couple important factors here. Make sure the property is zoned residential, okay? We talked about that earlier. Is the property greater than 10 acres? And is the water and sewer public? For the 10-acre issue, if it's more than 10 acres, you could have issues getting Fannie and Freddie financing, or at least the retail buyer could have issues because there's guidelines on Fannie and Freddie. Also, is the water, sewer public? If it's not, then best practice is to have your real estate investor get a water or sewer inspection, okay, the well and septic inspection and certified, okay, because if you haven't dealt with a well before or septic issue, those are thousands of dollars, and if they're not listed as a repair within the scope of project, then that's going to be a red flag, okay? Is the property in a flood zone? Although this is not critical, the property itself, the land, the backside of it, maybe back up to a creek, that might be okay. But as soon as that flood line drops within a certain footage, and I don't know the details on this exactly of how far from the house, or that flood line actually touches the dwelling footprint, it could be issues, and you might be required to carry flood insurance. And it also poses issues and it may scare off some retail buyers. All important things to consider here. And at the bottom, of course, there's more comments, so you make sure that you read those thoroughly. So also improvements. Now this section is more about retail properties that are on the market that are have had improvements on the subject property and are being sold retail. I'm not totally concerned about those because basically the properties we're financing are expected to be in not great shape and not retail shape. So what I'm more concerned about in the improvements area is the fact that if there were improvements done, is that they were done to code and they were approved, okay? Having an addition put onto a house and it not being approved by the county, you got major problems, okay? So you want to make sure that the improvement section, that's where that's listed. And you're also, the appraiser will mention this area down at the bottom here. It says, is the subject property free from any physical deficiencies that would affect liability, soundness, or structural integrity? So that will be a comment down at the bottom of the section. Now, make sure that your real estate investor lists those repairs within the scope of project to make sure that's covered and included. All right, so let's move on here. All right, so this is the section where this is where all the magic happens. This is the sales comparison approach section. And if you look at it on the screen, those 3 lines on the far left, those are columns of all of the comparables. Those are 3 comps right there, sales comp 1, 2, and 3. And in the highlighted left section, which is yellow, is the subject. That's the property in which you are looking to finance, okay? And everything is going to be compared back to the subject property. Now, at the top in section C right there, it may be small, I really can't tell if you can see this from where you're at, but the proximity subject is, now this is just a sample appraisal, but this shows comp 1 is 0.75 miles, comp 2 is 1.25, and 3 is also 1.25. So not sure if I said this earlier, but you're looking to make sure that these comparables, these comps, are less than a mile. That's a Fannie Freddie guideline. But preferably, I want comps that are in my neighborhood, close enough to where I can hit my 9-iron to them, okay? Next door, down the street, 2 streets down, they need to be in the neighborhood, okay? That's the only way you're going to get an accurate and reliable appraisal. A couple things to think about here. Distance from our subject. If he's pulling, or she, the appraiser's pulling comps that are crossing a major highway, a 2-lane road, an important thoroughfare, or even railroad tracks, that is a completely different comp, okay? So keep that in mind. That should be a really big red flag. Now, it's okay if properties and comps are 1.25 away. This may be a rural property. It shows it in Wisconsin. So it's okay that they're a 1.25, all right? That's not a real big deal. But once you start seeing 2 and 3 miles, that is then going back to marketability. How soon can you actually flip this property and get paid out on your private money loan? That's ultimately what we're looking at here. So, but distance of comps is really important. Another one just below that, under the data source, the D section there, it shows you your days on market. All 3 of them are ranging from 80, 73 to 102 days on market. That's DOM. That's days on market. This is the actual marketing time, and these are sourced from MLS. So these came off of the multiple listing service. This shows that from the day it was listed for sale, this is how long it took to go under contract. Not to the time it closes, but from the time it went off the market or under contract. All right? So the average days on market here looks to be roughly what, like 85, 90 days roughly, give or take. So it's within 3 months. I think that's acceptable. Interesting, I just want to throw this out to you. I just researched this a couple days ago just to give you some backdrop. In 2012, during the housing recovery, the average days on market was 69 days. That's throughout the entire nation. In July of 2016, it was 36 days. So that's almost cut in half in terms of days on market. So as you can see, the recovery, that we have a very active buyer's market. So therefore, it's a seller's market. You get a lot of active buyers out there. And so this is actually driving up some prices, okay? So that is an appreciating market. And from there, it's taking about 41 additional days to actually close. So from start to finish, you could be talking from 36 days plus 40, what is that, almost 2 months? But remember, that is a national average, and it's driven directly by the market. So your marketplace could be, where you're lending, could be an average of 55 days or 19 days. It just kind of depends on really where you're lending. So it's a really important fact to remember on the days on market. And what that indicates is how long you're going to intend or look to hold that private money loan, okay? Our focus at Street Lender is trying to get in, this is on a rehab flip deal. Our focus is to try to get in and get out of that project within 6 to 9 months. And just as an example, we funded one last August, and this was in Fayetteville, North Carolina. We knew up front it was not going to be a 6-month deal. It ended up being 12 months. It actually closed early September, end of August of this year. So it took about 12 months to rehab it and market it and actually close, and our private money loan got paid off. So, and that's okay. You know, our private money lenders are earning interest. Okay, we had plenty of reserve in terms of the equity, so we knew we were protected. So let's move on here. So we talked about days on market. We talked about comps that should be within 6 months. We talked about proximity, making sure that they're within a mile or less of the subject property.
Okay,
Now,
and
here's
Kevin,
another.
actually, if I can jump in, I got a question right on that specific issue. Somebody asked if you were investing in more rural or country areas, does the Fannie Mae guidelines change for the distance? If it's greater than a mile out, do they have different guidelines depending on what type of area that the property is held in?
Yeah, and there are, and that's a guideline. And as long as the and this kind of goes for really anything that shows as a red flag within the appraisal. If the appraiser can provide a valid reason why he needs to go or she needs to go 2.5 miles for a comp, that's up to the underwriter to make that exception. And you as a lender, again, this should be within your lending guidelines to remind yourself, hey, I don't want a comp that's 5 miles away. But if you do, make sure you've got it written down so you know you can go back to it and you can refer to your lender guidelines. But that's a great question. And it's okay, but just make sure it's acceptable for you. I mean, you're the lender. You're the one making the rules. So make sure you've got that those guidelines set within yourself. So also some important factors within this sales comp grid. You'll see that each column has a row which talks about its location, when it was sold, is it above grade, how many bedrooms, how many baths, what's the square footage, what's the condition. And what the appraiser is going to do is take each of those comps and either add a little bit of value or take a little bit of value away to bring it to as close to the valuation of that subject property as possible, so that way you know you've got good comps. And a good way to indicate whether you have good comps is if you look at the bottom, that little red block down at the bottom, it'll say net adjustment or gross adjustment. And what this means is that it's tracking the percentage of adjustments either up or down that the appraiser had to make to get that comparable in line with the final valuation of that subject property. And in this case, they're using the sales price because that is the market value, and this is a retail appraisal. So this is a finished sales price and finished property that's on the market. But in cases that we're lending on, it's going to be the after repair value, after repairs as to what that market value is. So the appraiser is going to try to get all these comps in line, add or subtract from the comparable to get it in line. And the way you can double check to make sure that these adjustments are not way out of whack, a good rule of thumb is to make sure that the net adjustments are no more than 15%, and the gross are no more than 25%. So I think in this, it's kind of covering here, but it looks like my net adjustments on this appraisal are what, 4 to 3%, 5%, and your gross are 8.4, 11, 20, 12. So these comparable adjustments are okay. Another thing to look at is to make sure that there's no line item that has any more larger than a 10% adjustment by itself. And so, for example, if the appraiser mentioned there's an upgrade on the property, let's say there's a swimming pool or an outbuilding and so forth, that's a red flag. You want to make sure that the appraiser did not overcompensate for that outbuilding. So let's say it's like a 10 by 10 shed, but he gave a value of $15,000, okay? That's a red flag. So you need to make sure that adjustment is within line. Another thing I'd like to mention is below grade. In fact, that's down there in the section right here, basement and finish below grade. So below grade is just the ground level, okay? So anything below ground level or grade is considered a basement. And a basement square footage adjustment is not the same as above grade adjustment. So for example, if your appraiser is saying, okay, it's a 1,200 square foot house, we add 500 square feet of below grade basement, they can't use the same square footage price as they do above grade. They just can't. It's against their guidelines. They cannot do that. At the same time, so that should be a red flag. At the same time, so let's talk about above a garage, a bonus room. That's what I'm trying to think of what that was. A bonus room. So on some bonus rooms, they have like an A-frame center in that room, so the walls, like near your head, come down at an angle. Well, this is kind of a real fine point here. Anything below 8 feet, so if that wall goes up and then meets the ceiling at an angle and it's below 8 feet, that's where the square footage begins of that room. So you might lose 100 square feet of the bonus room, but if they're considering the entire footprint, that's not proper guidelines. So that's a real nuance, but just something to consider. Again, at the bottom, make sure any negative notes or comment sections that you read that thoroughly and adjust that into your guidelines. So let's see, I'm just trying to make sure I've got, but yeah, this sales comparison approach section, this is your meat and potatoes. This is where all the magic happens, and this is where you'll spend a lot of time making sure those comps are accurate. All right, so let's move on here. Just another fine point here, make sure that the appraisal is signed and dated by the appraiser. Again, less than 6 months. I'm going to move to this a little ahead here because this is really what we're looking for. At the end of the day, at the end of the valuation, after all is said and done, the appraiser is going to give you, now this is on the bottom of page 2 of 6. Remember that report 6 pages long? This you'll find on the bottom of page 2, and it's the after repair market value, okay? So what this says here is based on a complete and visual inspection of the interior and the exterior of the subject property, defined scope of work, which is what your real estate investor has given you, which then is given to the appraiser, the statement of assuming and limiting conditions. The appraiser certified and has been at this property, and on this date, this is the value. After repairs, after all is said and done, after look at all the comps, this is the value. And this is really what you're looking for, okay? And in this case, it's $423,000 on September 1st, 2000X, okay? So that's on the bottom of page 2 of 6. Now, as we mentioned earlier, there was a market conditions addendum. I wanted to kind of point this out because this is an additional item that just gives you overall conditions of what's happening in the marketplace. So what it's looking for is what's happening with properties? Are they stable? Are they decreasing? Are they increasing? One other thing they're going to mention is, are there foreclosures that are affecting this specific marketplace? If there are, then you need to make sure that that's okay for the retail buyer. So it's perfectly fine to see foreclosures happening within an area, like say an area being regentrified, like say some of these older communities that are really close to say a central downtown or downtown area. Foreclosures are common, and that's acceptable. But if you go into the suburbs and you're going into a development and you've got a bunch of foreclosures, remember, that's who you're going to compete against when you're real estate investors rehabbing that property and then putting it back on the marketplace. Most retail buyers don't want to live in a market in a neighborhood where there's a high foreclosure rate. All right, so that gives you an indication on the market trends, and there's the after repair value. So what I've got here is a picture of a before and after, and just for some of you on the call that have never done a private money loan, this is just to show you that this is real. I mean, these types of deals are done every day, and they're done all over the country. Those shows you see on TV, flip this house, they're real, and this would happen. So when you've done it right, you can successfully protect your IRA, you can make solid return, and you can do it with real security. So this has really been an abridged version of a crash appraisal course, but I'm hoping that you've gathered some great takeaways from this conversation, and I really appreciate you joining us today. And
yeah,
Scott,
yeah, Kevin, I'm sorry, great job. We did have another question come in from a participant. I'd say if anyone else has one, as we're sitting here, please get them typed in. I have another one or two of my own. The question came in, said the borrower pays for the appraisal. Does the borrower then also get a copy of the appraisal?
Yes, and that's a really important distinction. You will definitely supply your real estate investor with a copy, okay? But the distinction is the fact that because you have ordered the appraisal, you own it. So if for some reason you can't fund that project for the real estate investor, it's up to you to release it to go to another lender. Okay, that's a really important distinction. Now, I want to kind of add to that too, that let's say a real estate investor comes to you with an appraisal from some other source. That's great. That's fine. You're going to use the same criteria to underwrite that appraisal and review it just like you would if you ordered it yourself. Okay? And that's where the checklist comes into play, and that's what's really important about making sure that you have a clear and concise path on evaluating these appraisals.
Yeah.
And then we mentioned that real quick. And I'm just going to throw this in there real quick, that to get a copy of that appraisal checklist, just send me an email, kevin@streetlender.com, and I'll make sure you get a free download of that, and you can use that and go along as you review. Okay, so
Good.
Scott, what was that?
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that. It'll give our people who are attending an option or a takeaway from it, at least, in a way to reach out to you and get that. Question, though, I mean, we hear a lot about when people talk about evaluating real estate. Obviously, there's appraisals, but you hear people also throw in, I can get a broker's price opinion, or maybe I can use the tax-assessed value. Can you shed some light on how the values you get from the county tax assessor and also the broker's price opinion, how those are different from an appraisal?
Sure. Scott, those are really different valuations, okay? A licensed appraiser, and I'll also talk about inspections too in a second, but a real estate appraisal is to give you value on the market value. A BP, and it's coming from a licensed appraiser. A BPO, which is a broker's price opinion, is given to someone from a realtor's perspective. And it's not, while it's valid, and it's important, it provides information, they don't go through, to provide a BPO, they don't go through the detailed analysis that an appraiser would, okay? They're pulling comps, they're giving you some information. In fact, the realtor probably won't even visit the property. So they're strictly going off of the comps that they're pulling on the MLS, period. They don't know the condition, they don't know what the real estate investor is doing to improve the property. So that's the difference. The tax assessment value is also much different in that, as we all know, the county appraises our properties every 5, 7, 10 years, okay? And that's to assess, to appropriate the right amount of taxes against that property. And again, that also has nothing to do with market value. They're taking the general market conditions, and they're taking it over a 5 and 7 year period. So it's not even close to being accurate to what's happening. In addition to that, they've got some special formula, a logarithm, that they only use a percentage of this snapshot of the market value at the time. So again, don't be confused by assessed tax value, a BPO value, and appraisal. They're all different, okay? Now, kind of further on that, an inspection. People might think that a property inspection is the same. Well, an appraisal is there to give you value. A property inspection is there to give you functionality. So do all my systems work? Does my HVAC work? Does my electrical work? Are there structural issues? So the inspection is a much different report, and in fact won't even talk about value. It'll talk about functionality of the property.
Great, Kevin. I'm going to wrap up here in just a minute. Just one final question I had here, unless anyone else throws one in that was listening. What if you get an appraisal back and you think there's an error in it, or you just don't agree with the final value? Kind of what are your steps? What do you do?
Sure, and that happens. If by doing your analysis and extra validation, you come across a point that you don't agree with the appraiser, it is perfectly okay to reach out to the appraiser and say, hey, look, I don't know why you use this comp. I think it's, out of range. And it's really up to you, between you and the appraiser, to clarify what errors that you may have found and have it redone. But that's not to say that the appraiser will change it. I mean, if it's an error, they'll fix it, right? It's a clerical error, they'll fix it. But if it's a matter of a subjectivity question or they're a matter of opinion, they may not change it. But you always should ask. If you always have a concern or question, remember this is your time to do your due diligence and to make sure that your assets are protected. That's a great question.
All right, good. Well, Kevin, I want to thank you again for coming on today, and hopefully everybody that's on the webinar can take advantage. Get in touch with Kevin to get your appraisal checklist, and certainly reach out to Kevin if you have any more questions that you have on appraisals and what is involved. And I invite everyone who's attending or listening to the recording to also check out our webinar on this Friday, October 21st, or at least find one of our recordings on our YouTube channel about being the bank with a self-directed IRA, where we talk about your IRA being a lender. So Kevin was talking a lot about today how you evaluate the properties if you are being a lender with your IRA. How do you evaluate the properties that are backing that loan? Just come to this webinar. We'll tell you about actually how to have your IRA act as a lender and what goes along with it. So Kevin's kind of on step 2 and 3 of when you're being a lender. We'll go back to step 1 with the webinar this Friday. So make sure you attend that, or come to one of our Brewing Success events that's coming up next week as well. And if you have any questions for me, my contact information is here on this last slide. Reach out to me if you have questions on IRAs in general, or just anything regarding self-direction, or we will appreciate everybody logging in and calling in today. Kevin, thank you very much for coming in today.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Scott.
All right, well, at this time we'll close the webinar, and we look forward to hearing from everybody.